Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to our Shaw Media Bears Insider uh, podcast. I'm sorry, we've been off for a few weeks, and I forgot it's Shaw Local. Forgive me for that, guys, but shawlocal.com, Bears Insider podcast. It's Shaw Media as well. I am Hub Arkush, along with my co-host, our Shaw Media Group Sports Editor, Kyle Nabors, our Shaw Media Bears Insider, Shaw Local Bears Insider, Sean Hammond. And it's good to be back with you. We took a few weeks off, much like the football team did. You know, that final veteran mini camp comes and everybody disperses to the four corners of the country or the world or whatever and take their summer vacation. And we needed a few weeks to refresh and get a better perspective on what the off season has been. But we're delighted to be back with you now for the season. Now the summer's not over. I guess it is for us as far as summer break, but fortunately we're only halfway through. And one of the rights of summer is training camps open. Actually, two camps opening today for the teams playing in the Hall of Fame game. The rest of the league will go to camp next week. And the Chicago Bears will be reporting on Tuesday. First practice will be on Wednesday of next week. So we're here to talk to you a little bit about it. And we actually, Sean and I had a chance to visit yesterday with Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles. They are back from vacation as well, something that the Bears did, had a little media breakfast where they invited us all out. We actually got to see a part of Halas Hall we've never seen before, Sean, but above practice fields 3 and 4, back by the Walter Payton Center at the Bears facility. And there's practice fields 1 and 2 are by the main facility. There is a viewing room that I guess they use for corporate guests and special folks. The media not really allowed up there often, but up there we got to visit a little bit. I think it was probably off the record. I think that was understood with Matt and Ryan. Sean, nobody was asking them any particularly tough questions or expecting to get any stories or scoops out of it. But it was interesting to see where they're at, because this is the official beginning of what they call phase 3 for these guys. Their roster is built now, and now it is up to Flus and his staff to see what they can do with it.
Yeah, it was fun getting back out there, and especially just seeing the bleachers are all set up for camp, and they were we were watching them line the field from that viewing box you were talking about, and everything's getting ready to go here. So it's an exciting time, and yeah, it almost feels like the beginning of the school year.
You know, Kyle, it's funny that Sean used that reference or that analogy, because I struck me yesterday that I almost felt like Ryan and Matt had kind of gone from elementary school to middle school, if you will. Everything was, and I'm not making light of them in any way. It's just a silly analogy. But everything, these first 5-6 months, you could tell they were just so new in the job and feeling their way and being so careful. And yesterday, I felt both came on much more comfortable, very strong, in where they were at, and their feelings about where the team is at. Flus in particular almost seemed like a little bit of a different guy to me, and that's part of the process. You see that when you have regime change and a new and first time general manager and head coach, and they seem to have adapted to it pretty well. Yesterday, they felt very much like the guys running the Chicago Bears to me, not the new kids in town.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into training camp here. Yeah, those guys are getting more comfortable. It's anyone. When you start a job, you're kind of walking on eggshells. Even if you feel like you're qualified, you kind of have that a feeling a lot of times. New place, new people, try and feel out the situation. I'm looking forward to getting into training camp next week, though, guys, because I want to see what it looks like under Matt Eberflus. Do you guys expect them to be a little more physical than we've seen over the last few years?
Well, again, they're limited in what they can do. Remember, they lost the OTA for that. They are allowed after 5 days to put pads on, and there certainly will be contact. I think, 3-4 days in a row. I forget exactly how the rules work, but they can't have pads or contact. I think it's more than 4 practices a week. I got to go back and refresh my memory on how it all works. So, within the boundaries of the new world order in the NFL, this new group of players, what this union has negotiated, I think that it will be, Sean, I think the word I would use is aggressive. I think, we're going to see a lot of these, what Flus has told us is that they better wear their track shoes. They're going to be running everywhere. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on speed and running and conditioning. The contact part of it, I don't know. That's a good question, Kyle. Sean, what do you think? I don't have a feel for that yet. As I say, we're just kind of getting to know Matt Eberflus a little bit, and we've seen how they've run these off-season practices. I expect it to look a lot like the Lovie Smith camps. He is a Tampa 2 disciple, which makes him a Lovie Smith disciple. He has that connection through Rod Marinelli, and the Lovie camps were always more about, well, Kyle, you were there, those years in Bourbonnais, running everywhere, never standing still. The contact part, Sean, I'm not so sure about.
Yeah, and when Flus talks about, getting your track shoes, I think that's more what he means. They're not going to be out there running sprints necessarily, but they're running between drills, and they're running, certainly on the field. They talk about finish a lot. They want all their guys to finish, run hard through the play, whether that's offense or defense. From the physical perspective, I'm kind of with you. We're sort of in wait and see mode. Certainly, I know they were docked the OTA practice, but nothing that we saw was incredibly egregious or anything like that. We talked about that in depth in the spring. I don't think we really need to get into it anymore. But yeah, we'll have to see once they get these first couple practices out of the way, and once they can actually put the pads on and start hitting a little bit. I don't expect anything super unusual, but we'll see.
Guys, one thing I do want to just take a moment to point out to the folks that are with us live, and of course, anybody who chooses to download the podcast, listen to it later, would still, I hope, like to know this information. When I talk about taking some time off, actually the three of us, I think, took a couple days. We've been working right through. We took a few weeks off from the podcast because, you can only say the same thing so often until you get some new information. But we've worked pretty hard to try and get you all ready for this training camp with our off-season review and previews, if you will. If you get to shawlocal.com, we have a series. Sean has actually done a great job ranking what he believes to be the 25 most important Bear players or storylines in order from 25 down to number 1. I don't think there's a lot of mystery around number 1, but we'll talk about the other 24. And I think we're at number 1. If I know what I've seen, I'm not sure what's hit the papers yet.
It's up right now, so go to shawlocal.com and read it.
Yeah, I'll give you all one guess who it is, but it's still worth reading because it's a good piece. And it's all archived at shawlocal.com. It's pretty good background and in-depth stuff on who are going to be the nucleus and the heart of this football team. I've come at it from a different perspective. I've also done somewhat in-depth in terms of covering the whole roster, not necessarily in-depth scouting reports on all 90 players, obviously, but I've gone position by position, previewed each position, talked about where they fit in the NFL around league average, what the best outcome could be, what the potential problems could be, brief scouting reports on each player, biggest plus and biggest concern each player brings. So this is all, there are still hours of beach or deck or backyard reading for you over the next few days as we get into training camp. And I think we've broken this football team down pretty good for you, which I guess, Kyle, is not a bad segue into, we want to get to questions for those who have them. And I think you said our buddy Rick had an interesting question we wanted to get to.
Yeah, I thought Rick had a good question to start with before we kind of get into more specific training camp and position type stuff. Rick had said, if you had to give the Bears offseason a grade, what would it be? And also, who has a better, second, and also, who has a better rookie year, Gordon or Brisker or someone else?
Sean, I need to think about it I'm going to put you on the spot first because I'm trying to come up with a grade right now. Do you have any immediate thoughts on that?
I'm going to be very vanilla here and give it a C. It wasn't, like we said, there was more they could have done in free agency. Now, you got to look at this from their perspective too. We don't know exactly what Ryan Pohl's long-term plan is, but certainly it looks like it's all about resetting and giving yourself some cap space in future years. And from that perspective, that was all good. If you're talking about winning games this year, I don't think that's necessarily what they were going out there trying to do. I'm kind of in wait and see mode, I guess. I think they did a good job in the draft, given the situation they were in without a first round pick. I like that they traded down. I thought maybe they'd trade down sooner, but they were able to get a big crop of young rookies and hopefully a couple of starters there with those first couple of picks.
Yeah, Rick, and this is Rick Gonzalez, by the way. I'm going to go a little bit higher than Sean, and I guess I don't want to go all fifth grade math teacher on you or whatever, but the question is, how are we grading? I mean, are we trying to put them on a bell curve with the other 32 teams? Generally, when we talk about grading off seasons and teams, it's who got better and who has the best chance to win now. But that's not what the Bears were trying to do, and even though they've refused to just flat out say we are in a complete rebuild, we know they are. And Ryan Poles, as he's gotten more comfortable with us, as he has alluded to it in a number of different ways, the plan was to rebuild the entire organization. And so in that respect, I'm going to give them probably a B minus. And the only reason I'm even putting the minus on it is because of the Robert Quinn situation. And I'm not blaming them for that, but they do come to training camp. I mean, we will blame somebody eventually once we know the whole story. But right now, all we know is that Robert Quinn does not appear to be a part of this football team. And considering that he is their best player, they're only all-pro last year. Well, that's not true either. Roquan Smith was a second-team all-pro. But again, I think you get my point. Everything else that they set out to do in a rebuild, they've done a really good job of. I mean, I hate the job that the idea that Khalil Mack is gone, and I don't think they got enough for him, but the goal was to clean up their cap situation. And really with that one trade, and now the expiring contracts from last year and the ones that are coming at the end of this year, they're going to go into year 2 of their rebuild, which is always the pivotal year, with the most cap space in the NFL, unless they do something dramatic now that we just don't see coming, a big trade, and I don't think they will. They've thrown a lot of young talent at various positions, but they'll never admit this. They don't particularly want to win a lot of games this year because they need to acquire a lot more talent. And if they are one of the 3, 4, 5 worst teams in the league, they're going to have a top 5 draft pick. They could very well end up with the number 1 pick overall in the draft. I'm not predicting that now, but it's a possibility. And forget, you're not going to use that if they get it for one player and suddenly your rebuild is taken off. We've seen in recent years that pick, these top 3 picks even. Look at what the 49ers paid for their young quarterback. So, I mean, they could turn that into 3 number 1s, a 2 and a 3, to start the second year. They wouldn't have them all in that draft, although there are several teams with multiple picks out there, depending on what they might want. So in terms of the first year of a rebuild, I think they've done a pretty good job of what they're trying to accomplish. Now, you have to add to that, Kyle. That means from where I sit, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league. And I don't think anybody's going to be happy about that. But that was the goal, and so that's what I got to grade them on.
There's a lot to unpack there of that what you just went through, because you changed my opinion a little bit with your argument, looking at it from giving them I think you said a B minus, but you're doing it because they accomplished what we believe to be their goals of getting this team, this franchise, in a better shape moving forward. So with that, I'm still not going to go very high. I'm going to go with C minus. I very much disliked the plan on the offensive side of the ball. I really liked what they did defensively. I like the makings of this defense. I think it has a chance to be really solid with the additions of Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon in particular to help that secondary. But offensively, I just don't think they did enough to help Justin Fields. Whether you think this is going to be a rebuild that takes 2 to 3 years or even 4 years, they need to find out what Justin Fields is capable of. I just don't think they put enough talent at the wide receiver and offensive line positions to really maximize Justin Fields' potential.
Kyle, that is a great point because it scares the hell out of me. Not even maximizing his potential, I'm afraid they're going to get him killed. That offensive line, to me, is clearly worse than it was last year. And that certainly is not what you wanted. And again, that's going into the season. We'll see. They're going to play a different scheme. They're going to play a different system. But you worry a lot about that. And you would think that it's not a big secret around the league. The biggest question about Justin Fields is his field generalship, his ability to read defenses and coverages. And when you don't have NFL quality receivers to throw to, that's really hard, So I think it's an excellent point. And now you're making me rethink my B minus, except that, again, that's kind of the cost of what they're trying to do, and you can't build it around one guy. And I'm going to get to something else in a minute. I want to get Sean's opinion on something to make sure I'm not stepping in something before I do it. But you have to remember, if this goes the way we think it's going to go, next year's quarterback draft is much better than this year's was, and it may prove to be better than the Fields draft. And there's two guys at the top, and C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. I think C.J. Stroud is probably a slightly better prospect coming out of Ohio State than Justin Fields was. Now, I love as a prospect Justin Fields, and I think they could have their franchise quarterback. But if it proves out this year that there's still too many questions, and it's not because of what he had around him, that could be something that we're talking about. So you got to wait and see. So that's where it gets a little complicated. But, Sean, I don't know. I think Kyle did make an excellent point. We've talked about it enough during the summer. I am worried that they have not put, Justin Fields in a position to succeed.
Yeah, you would have liked to see them get, maybe one more veteran wide receiver in there. Maybe, do a little something more on the offensive line other than add a bunch of rookies. So certainly there's, those, we're going to be talking about those positions a lot over the coming weeks as we get into a camp here, and we actually get to see what they're doing on the field and see who's playing where in relatively meaningful snaps. And it's fair to be concerned about that, and it's fair to dock them, on your grade because of that. But like you said, Hub, it also kind of comes down to what the goal was, and you can make the argument that Ryan Poles has had a good offseason in terms of just freeing up the cap space and setting themselves up for the future.
Guys, Sean, did you hear at any point yesterday that we were in fact off the record, or?
I think it was assumed.
Yeah. So, but I think this is fairly well. No, I'm not even. I think I'd be safe in it, but why get in trouble before camp even opens? Just an interesting conversation. Let me just say this. I'll give you my opinion. People who are spreading the idea that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus may not be sold on Justin Fields are wrong. Okay, they do really sold on him is tough. He hasn't done enough to be. I mean, some people aren't sold on Patrick Mahomes yet, believe it or not, because he didn't have quite the year last year that he did the couple of years before. Obviously, they think he's a great quarterback. So sold on him isn't the way to put it. But I can tell you this: they're really happy to have him, and they do like him a lot. They are not coming into this thinking we may have to get better at quarterback. They are hopeful right now that they've got their franchise quarterback, and that's given them a good head start. Let me put it that way.
And they should be.
Yeah.
When you're coming into this job, I mean that will make their jobs a whole lot easier if Justin Fields is as good as everybody thinks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he has to develop, Kyle, but just what I'm trying to say, and this is my observations. This is not anything I was told yesterday. They're very happy to have Justin Fields. This is not a situation where maybe they're not sold on him. I mean, I've read some really stupid stuff where people say they're setting him up to fail. No. Now, that may be the end result of this. They're looking at their overall plan, and I kind of like the fact that they're just treating him as one piece of it. Because what would really be a mistake to me, Kyle, would be building the whole overall plan around him, not knowing yet enough, about who he's going to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. By essentially limiting your exposure in future years, we saw a bunch of one-year contracts held out. I mean, that does give you some more flexibility if things go off the rails here. Someone had said, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but guys, if we get to like week 3 or week 4, it might not start right away, but if the Bears are 0-3, 0-4, and Justin Fields is struggling, you can guarantee this conversation is going to heat up, and you're going to really throughout the fall have to deal with it. It's a new regime. Justin Fields struggled. I expect him to take a pretty significant step forward, and I don't think we're going to have this conversation come December. But if they do struggle here's a question. I'll throw this here to kind of give us. I feel like I'm being a really negative right now on a counterweight. Someone had asked, I think it was Mr. Shorty, had said if the Bears went 11-6, I believe, like they did in 2018, would we consider that to be the fact that maybe we undervalued this team and coaching staff, or was that more of like a fluke year, such as 2018 and was it 2001 where the Bears had a really good year and then went right back to not being very good? I guess when I say that or bring that up there, what do you guys see or what would need to happen for the Bears to have a season like that where they maybe win 10 or 11 games?
I don't think it's possible, Kyle.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible either. I'm trying to be
really easy for me.
Optimistic here.
Yeah, I mean, 2001, obviously I was in the broadcast booth. I was really close to that group. There was nothing fluky about that. That team was loaded with talent. And there was nothing fluky about 2018. If you remember, they had 7 Pro Bowlers and 4 All Pros, and it was legit. I mean, those guys. I mean, Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack and Allen Robinson and Roquan Smith. I mean, they're gone now. They're not part of this, but that there was talent on that team. I mean, there's no way with this team, and beyond that, when you say if they're struggling at 0-3 or 0-4, I mean, I don't know, maybe they win one, maybe they beat I forget the order, or they get them, but I think they get the Commanders and the Lions in there. I don't think any of these games are slam dunks. I don't know. We went through this, Sean. I thought I did it with you. We did it with somebody. 17 weeks and could only come up with 2 games where I was pretty sure they were going to be the favorite. Now that's based on what we know now. That obviously all changes, as the season goes on, and once we see who these teams are. But fans better get used to the idea. I think I'm talking about 2 different things now. They're almost certainly going to be 0-3 or 0-4 for a couple of reasons. Not just because I'm saying they're an awful football team. You've got a lot of guys on this, what will be 53-man roster, who will be gone next year. They know that going in. It's part of the process. That's number one. You've only got 3 or 4 guys that you're positive you're going to want back next year. So I mean that's the definition of a losing football team. But even beyond that, you're also going to be playing. I think the only 2 guys that'll be on the field who've ever played Luke Getsy's system are Lucas Patrick and Equinemius St. Brown. And I'm not even sure St. Brown's going to make the team or should make the team. So, not only is there a lot of, lower half or even not NFL caliber talent that's going to be on the field, they're going to be in a new system that they've got to get a chance to at least adjust to in NFL action. So the slow start is almost assured. I don't see any way, when I guess the problem, or not the problem, but my issue with the question is I don't agree that there was anything fluky about 01 and 18. I think those were seasons that they built to. The problem was that they couldn't sustain them. And for some of our younger, listeners and viewers, what happened in 01, that was Jerry Angelo's first year, and he was signed or hired as the general manager June 26th. That team had already been built, and he immediately set about tearing that team apart. Even after they went 13-3 and were the number 1 seed in the NFC, it was his team, wanted to put his stamp on it. He sent Ted Washington away. He started getting rid of a lot of guys. He inherited Brian Urlacher and Mike Brown. These guys aren't inheriting. Well, they're inheriting Roquan Smith. So I don't see any comparison, Sean, between this group and those 2 groups.
Yeah, just because a team has a one-off really good year, I certainly wouldn't necessarily call that a fluke. Those teams were really talented and they were really good. Certainly, Hub, you were really close to that situation, both those situations. And, if the Bears, I also don't see it likely that this Bears team wins 10 or 11 games, but, you would certainly, if you're a Bears fan, that certainly would mean that Justin Fields is having a heck of a year. So you're going to be feeling really good about the future and where things are at. But I think you can make that same argument if they win, 7 or 8 games. I don't think this team has to win that many games for you to be feeling good moving into the future here, because, if Justin Fields shows that improvement from year 1 to year 2, you're going to feel good, no matter what the win total winds up being.
Yeah, I mean, if the Bears win, let's say they go 6-11, but Justin Fields plays really well, you're not going to mind the fact that the Bears went 6-11. You're going to be pretty happy, I think, at the end of the year with the direction of this franchise.
And you're going to feel really good about that cap space and the draft and the talent that they could add to this team.
I think if yeah.
So no, I'm sorry, Mr. Shorty's chiming in, following up here, saying he would like to bet you an Italian beef they don't go 0-3.
First, Mr.
I got the
Shorty, how
schedule
about
here.
let's just get together and I'll buy you an Italian beef because I could care less. I mean, I'm not predicting it. I've said, I don't know if I've said it in our podcast before, but I say it all the time on TV and the radio. Guys, I have nothing against gambling on the NFL as long as you can handle it. I think it's great fun for a lot of people. I'm not, Puritan or anything like that. I have not. Well, I've made one bet because I went and tweeted about it. And it literally is the only bet my Jesper Horsted jackpot last year, just because I was screwing around with my son. But that is literally the only bet I've made in 35 or 40 years, only because I hate the losing so much more than I enjoy the winning. It's just that simple. That's why this is a particular activity that's not for me. As far as your point, Mr. Shorty, who knows what's going to happen the first 3 games? But I'll tell you what, I'll bet you they're not better than 3-7. Come the halfway point, and I'd be very surprised if they have 3 wins at that point. Although again, until we know more about the team, who knows? What I think is a reasonable goal, and what they're trying to do here is if they can go. And again, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but if they can go 3-3 down the stretch, the last 6 games. If they're playing much better football the last 6 games than they are the first 6 games, then it was a successful season. I think you got to set realistic goals here, guys. And they may upset the 49ers on opening day because we don't know who the 49ers are. They're going to have Trey Lance at quarterback. Obviously, if they're telling Jimmy Garoppolo to go find a trade for himself. And by the way, I want to talk about that in a couple minutes too. Just overall, as far as who this team is going to be. The other thing, just real quick, because this is always a passion of mine, and it's partly because I'm old and a lot of people didn't even get to enjoy it. But that 0-1 team, that was a special, incredible year. I mean, that was year 2 with Brian Urlacher. And that team didn't have a franchise quarterback. Jim Miller, who is a dear friend and was a good quarterback, never really got to have his own football team, let alone become a franchise quarterback. And he was a backup basically everywhere he went besides here in Chicago. And yet they were still 13-3. And what happened in 2002, at the end of the divisional playoff game that they lost in what was their first playoff game, while we were doing the post-game show from the press box, they started tearing apart Soldier Field. 2002, all the home games were played in Champaign. That team had a run of injuries like no team I had ever seen. Everything came apart. But it wasn't because 0-1 was a fluke. It was because of everything that happened to him in 2002 and what Angelo was doing to the team. When you look at 2019, the Bears didn't go back in the tank. They were a 500 football team that was, 4 or 5 plays away from 10 or 11 wins. And again, we're not relitigating, Matt Nagy or the Nagy pace regime. But that's just the fact. Those teams, again, and now I'll shut up because I guess I'm more passionate about this than anybody cares. But they weren't flukes. It just they did what they didn't do was they didn't put a solid foundation in. They did not become one of the better organizations in football, which is what you want them to be, very much like the Patriots or the Packers. Yeah, I said it. You'd give anything, Bears fans, for the Bears to be as good as the Packers organization, whether you ever want to admit it or not. The Ravens, all the perpetual playoff teams. That's who you want the Bears to be. And that's why I'm comfortable with what they're doing here, because now it's about putting the foundation in place for that. I don't know if these guys can do it or not, but I would think that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point with the 2001 team about not putting down a foundation, and that's where this front office is starting at. That to me is the best reason to be optimistic about the Bears, because I mean, I think they're doing it the right way. I mean, you never really know until we get out there and like everyone. I saw a questioner talking about Luke Getsy earlier, talking about how the offense would be better because they have a competent offensive coordinator. And I didn't, we haven't really talked about it yet, but my question would be like, why do you believe he's a competent offensive coordinator? We haven't seen him, Luke Getsy, as an offensive coordinator yet. We have no idea what this offense is going to look like. There's reason to be optimistic, but that's kind of the fun part about training camp and why I wanted that break over the last month here, but now I'm re-energized and ready for football because this is really a blank slate to me, you guys. Like, I have no idea what this is going to look like come week 1 against the San Francisco 49ers. How aggressive they're going to be, how conservative they're going to be, what progression Justin Fields has made, what adjustments that they've worked on with. This is really, really wide open for what we're going to see here throughout training camp and into the start of the regular season.
And that's why it's so hard to predict these things before the season, because think about all the teams that have new head coaches now, and you got under that layer, you got coordinators moving all over the place. We don't know what the Bears are going to look like, and certainly, like I think you mentioned, Hub, we don't necessarily know what the 49ers are going to look like. And you look at that schedule, they got the 49ers and the Packers in week 2. They got the Texans and Giants in weeks 3 and 4. And those are certainly, on paper, those are certainly winnable games.
Yeah, I mean, guys, listen, I'm not predicting anything at this point with the Packers, because obviously Aaron Rodgers is one of the best players in football, and he's that rare guy who can win games by himself. It seems by himself. Nobody wins games by themselves, but he can make it happen with the people around him, I guess is the better way to put it. But there's huge questions about the Packers. I think that they're going to be very, very good on defense, because that defense was getting better as the season went on last year, and they've kept that together and added to it. Look at what they did in the draft. Now, we don't know if those picks are going to be any good, but there's real questions about their offense, and it's impossible to perpetuate, what they do. Now, week 2 in Green Bay, my guess is the Bears are going to be, 13, 14-point underdogs, something like that, and that'll be justified, and it would be one of the biggest upsets in history. But we don't know how good the Packers are going to be. One thing I think we've tried to be careful about here, I like Luke Getsy's background. I like his training. I like his mentors. I don't know if he's going to be any good as an offensive coordinator. He's never done it, So, that'd be like, me taking up archery and hitting bullseyes on day 2. Who the hell knows? We'll see what they do. God, I've never considered archery in my life. I don't know where I came up with that. Struggling for a metaphor there. But guys, in one respect, that's kind of the fun of this, I think. And obviously nobody's going to enjoy it if it's ugly, and if it's not competitive, and if they're losing big week in, week out. But that's why I keep coming back to where we started. You got to set goals, and if the goals aren't reasonable, you're not going to attain them, and so I don't know, how many games they're going to win, but I know what the goals should be. And this is where we started. I think they've been knocking some of them down so far in their preparation, and now we'll see how they do when they have to actually attack them on the football field.
I'm sorry, I got distracted here. Sam Rush had listed essentially a bunch of teams that he felt the Bears could beat. I'm just going to throw it up here really quick here, I guess. How can you not look at the schedule but be sure that they don't have a shot at beating teams like the 49ers, the Jets, Washington, Giants, Texas, the Texans, Falcons? They're not better than most of those teams. They can beat those teams, and the NFL is such a weird place. I mean, we saw that several times last year where what was it, the Jets, I believe, jumped up and got a couple teams. Like, that could happen, but going into the season, the Bears, talent-wise, the Bears are a bottom 3 or 4 roster. I mean, there's just no way around that.
Can you put the question back up? I assume that the folks that are with us live can see it as well. Sam, let me ask you a question. Of those teams that you just listed, whose roster would you rather have whose roster would you not rather have than the Bears? I mean, that's all we have to go on right now. And, I'm looking at these teams, and, Washington, their roster doesn't excite me. But I look at what the Giants have done and the players they've added, what Atlanta has just in some of the potential star power they've got. I think the Lions are going to be much improved this year. Absolutely. Minnesota, Miami, New England, Philadelphia. You're going to take those rosters over the Bears. Now, would you rather have the Bears roster than the Texans? Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to go back and study the Texans roster. But there's not an easy call in the bunch. So that's all we're talking about here. Nobody is saying my favorite. I probably have used it on this podcast 3 times. My favorite quote of all time is Vince Lombardi, who said early in his dynamic run with the Packers, on any given Sunday, and this was like 62 or 61, so what are we talking, over 50 years ago, but it hasn't changed, over 60 years ago, actually. On any given Sunday, there is no more than 10% difference in the talent on any NFL team's roster. The rest is all about attitude and coaching. Well, the Bears are the outlier in this. There is more than 10% difference in the talent on the Bears and a bunch of these teams. Again, because it was intentional, not because I'm criticizing anybody. And that's what brings us full circle to that comment that I said I want to make. And I got into the gambling thing. Guys, I wouldn't do it because I just don't bet. But if you do enjoy betting, it looks to me like one of the best value propositions on board is the Bears under 6.5 wins. I can't find them on the schedule now. Now, I could lose that bet. That's what makes it gambling. But, you look for value, and after you do all your analysis, they just don't appear to have the talent, to play with a lot of these teams. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But somebody tell me what I'm missing just in terms of what we know about them now.
No, I think all three of us are on the same page. But Sean, what were you going to say?
Here's my thing. I just want to see this defense, before we can definitively say, what this team's going to be. If this defense is able to take Matt Eberflus' system and have some success and create some turnovers, then they're going to be in games, regardless of what the offense looks like. If they can keep teams from getting in the end zone, they're going to give themselves a shot. And certainly, in the NFL, like we're saying here with these razor thin margins, either way, if you're in the game, that's half the battle. And I don't expect them to I would say, I like that line, Hub, 6.5. My prediction would be about 6 wins, if I'm doing it right now. I got to look at the schedule, I guess, a little more in depth again, but I wouldn't expect a whole lot more than that.
Well, and guys, let's keep in mind, it's hard not to win 6 games in the NFL. I mean, you get those bottom 3 teams and they don't. But if we go back and look at the standings from last year, I'm doing this off the top of my head. You got the Bears at 6. Yeah, I mean, let me put it to you different. I didn't even think about this until just now. Which team had more talent on the roster, last year's Bears and this year's Bears? I mean, it's obviously a rhetorical question.
Yeah,
okay,
well,
and the point is, they won 6 games. So I mean,
it's Bear Lisimo had asked us here, and Gary, you had asked about the defense, about Jaquan Brisker, and I do want to pivot to that since Sean brought up the defense. But I want to, since we're still talking about this, that Hub, who did we lose from the roster last year? Who on last year's performance we would miss? And I do want to quickly, Hub, before you answer that question, because I'm pretty sure Bear Lisimo, excuse me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure Bear Lisimo has been one of the people that's been really critical of the former coaching staff. And if you're really critical, if you think the last coaching staff was incompetent, how can you then say, I'm guessing like you're talking about guys like Khalil Mack or Allen Robinson, who either were hurt or didn't perform very well last year. But how can you put that on them if you thought the coaching staff was incompetent?
Well, and I think more to the point, you tell me, Bear Lisimo, do you think the Bears are a better team with Khalil Mack and Allen Robinson or without them? I mean, it's basically, and I understand why you'd ask the question, but I think the point of the question is just to have the debate. And it's an easy answer for me. I mean, they're going to miss Jason Peters, who played very well once he settled in at left tackle. They don't even know if they have a left tackle right now. They're certainly going to miss Allen Robinson. They're certainly going to miss they're going to miss even a guy like Marquise Goodwin, who didn't do what they wanted him to do, but was still better than any wide receiver they've got right now, probably other than, Darnell Mooney. They're going to miss Jimmy Graham, who did an outstanding job blocking at tight end. We don't know, what they've got right now. And then you come over to the defense, they're going to miss Khalil Mack. They're going to miss Bilal Nichols. They're going to miss Akeem Hicks, who didn't help when he was injured, but was still dominant when he wasn't. We don't even know. I mean, what, are you betting on Nicholas Morrow? I actually am. I like Nicholas Morrow. But they're going to miss Alec Ogletree, who played very good football for him. They're definitely going to miss Tayshaun Gibson. I mean, everywhere you look, they're going to miss a ton. And that was a team that won 6 games. So I don't think it's a debatable point that they're going to struggle to win football games, and so if the point there, the question is how many, let me see who's the 53 are. Let me see who ends up the starters. I mean, we only know for sure who 2 starters are on that offensive line right now. And so, until we get a handle on this, maybe 1 or 2 of these wide receivers can give them more than I think they can, Sean. I mean, I look at the depth chart and the list, and it scares the hell out of me. And that's why I worry about what they've done to support Justin Fields. But let's give these guys a chance. Let's see what they look like in training camp and Getsy's system. Let's get to week 3, week 4. Then we can have a conversation about what we know to be the team, guys. Right now, we're guessing at most of this.
Yeah, and you know what? Somebody's gonna have to step up, because it can't be all on Darnell Mooney at that wide receiver position, and the volume has to come from somewhere if the Bears are going to be throwing the ball at all. And it was interesting, Kyle. You might have read this, and I think it was in the number 1 on our countdown, which I'll spoil it now, is Justin Fields.
Surprising.
You're kidding.
Oh.
I was surprised. I guess maybe not surprised, but we spend all this time talking about the receiver position this offseason, and the Bears still do have their top 3 leaders in receptions back from last year. And that's a good thing for Justin Fields. That's Darnell Mooney, that's Cole Kmet, that's David Montgomery. And not saying that means this offense is going to be great. I'm just saying there's some continuity there, which I think has not talked about as much. Now, you certainly would have liked to see them add another veteran receiver, and certainly all those guys are young. You want somebody with some experience and certainly a number 2 receiver, but somebody is going to step up, whether that's Byron Pringle or somebody else.
Yeah, really, you look at it from last year to this year when it comes to the wide receivers, and it's that was kind of a huge contention point. I felt like most of last season, the Bears were just not good enough at wide receiver. Outside of Darnell Mooney, Allen Robinson struggled. Zamir Bird and Marquise Goodwin, I believe, Hub, you called it. Was it? I can't remember the term you used for their speed, but anyway, they were guys that could really stretch a field. You're kind of in the same boat this year, where you have maybe instead of Allen Robinson was the established guy last year, and everyone else you kind of had questions marks about. Darnell Mooney now kind of stepped in that role where you feel good about him, and after that, you got a lot of question mark. Now there is upside once again with this group, but there's not a lot of concrete things to point to feel good about one of those guys stepping up. I think one of them will, I'm pretty sure, but I just don't know who it's going to be and how quickly.
Guys, I think that our audience, or our friends, our listeners, our viewers have taken us to what they want to talk about, which is how many games they might win. Didn't really expect it to go there, and we were touching on something a couple minutes ago, and I do want to get to this while we have a few minutes to maybe dig in a little bit. There is one bet that I would make, and that is, what is going to be the biggest story Tuesday on reporting day with this football team? And I think I know, and I would bet the house on it. And I'm curious what you guys think it's going to be.
Sean, I'll go first. We'll probably have the same thing. It's going to be Robert Quinn show if he's going to show, right?
Sean,
that's certainly in the conversation. And the other thing is, has Jaquan Brisker signed a contract yet?
He is not that I know of, at least.
Well, you're right, Sean, and that's a deal, and we did touch a little bit on that with Ryan yesterday. And again, I don't think I'm, giving away any off the record stuff when I said he's not freaking out about it, because Jaquan Brisker is going to sign a contract. It's all slotted. I mean, It's kind of like the Roquan Smith thing his rookie year, where they're probably debating some terminology. I don't know who Jaquan's agents are. That's going to get done. It is absolutely going to be Robert Quinn. And the reason I wanted to get back to it is because, Kyle, I think sometimes you're better at remembering that. Not sometimes. You're always better at remembering this stuff than I am. I think I wrote about this a couple times over the offseason. I think this defense could be pretty competitive, but not without Robert Quinn. I mean, Robert Quinn is the linchpin to that. He was the best pass rusher in the NFC last year. He should have been first-team All-Pro. I've gone back and forth with the comparison to Myles Garrett a dozen times. And Myles Garrett was great. but there's no way, or they should have been tied at the very least. He was one of the 3 best defensive ends in football. He was one of the top 5 playmakers on defense in football. He played the run as well as he rushed the passer. He led by example, if not vocally. And there's a reason, I'm sure, that they held on to him, even though they were dealing Khalil Mack and shipping out, all these other guys. Everything that I'm hearing is that he just does not want to be part of this football team. Now, I've not been able to determine the exact reasons why. I think it's as simple as he just doesn't want to have a 3-14 season in his mind. Doesn't want to, show up every week without a chance to be competitive. That's my guessing based on the sources that I've talked to. But obviously, if the Bears didn't want him, they would have tried to do something prior to the draft, because as soon as the draft went by, his value declined. He's turning 32 now. Now teams are going to have to give up higher picks next year when they don't know what they're getting. If the Bears could have used those picks this year, it would have impacted the rebuild better. There's a lot of explanation as to why they held on to him. Now, they can, but they're not just going to release him, because they're not going to get the cap relief that they got with Khalil Mack. But it seems obvious to me they want him to be here to anchor this young defense and keep them competitive. But what I'm hearing is that he doesn't want to be here. I've not been able to determine if there's a specific issue, a specific problem. And I will be shocked if he shows up on Tuesday. Now, I'm not saying I'll be shocked if he plays for the Bears this year, because this stuff always develops. And at some point, he has to deal with the fact that even though he's already a millionaire, a multimillionaire, you're still talking about leaving another, whatever, his base is this year, I think 13, 14 million on the table. And you get in all the dynamics of the holdouts. But everything I've been able to dig in and determine is that he's not going to be there Tuesday. I hope I'm wrong, and I'll be the first one to say I am, obviously, if he shows up. But I think this is going to be a bit protracted. And so now I start to worry about even on the defensive side, because the other part you got to look at, we were asking about Luke Getsy a little while ago. Alan Williams is a good football coach, and he's obviously a confidant of Matt Eberflus's. And with Flus here, you can have some comfort. His stamp is going to be on the defense too. But Alan Williams, one other experience as a defensive coordinator, didn't go well at all. And so, I just think there's more talent to work with on the defense. But it's not even a given as to how good they're going to be on defense when we now complete this puzzle and get to this conversation we're having about how many games they might win.
I think the defense is in pretty good shape comparative. I guess when we compare it to the offense, I think the defense has a chance to be league average, or maybe sneak it to like number 10 or 12 if everything goes right. I really like the secondary. Roquan Smith and Nicholas Morrow. Hub, you alluded to the fact that you like Nicholas Morrow. I do too. I think the linebacker is going to be good. I even like Travis Gibson. I think Travis Gibson made big strides last year that I expect to continue. But that's still, you need a pass rush in the NFL. And if Robert Quinn isn't there, I just don't know how the Bears are going to consistently get to the quarterback.
Yeah. If everything, when you look at this defense and you talk about them having success getting into Eberflus' system, everything really does revolve around having a guy like Quinn there. And I'm on that same boat with you guys, where I don't see this being the same year if Robert Quinn isn't there for the Bears. And from his, I know we haven't heard from him, and we don't get to, we might not hear from him if he doesn't show up. But, I think it's really pretty simple for Robert Quinn, a guy, like you said, Hub, he's 32 years old now. He's done everything. He's been an all-pro. He's nearly led the league in sacks last season. And, the guy's played in 2 playoff games his entire career. I don't think he wants to play for a team that's not going anywhere, at this point in his career. He came here to be with a Bears team that at the time, seemed like a playoff contender. And obviously things have changed quite a bit over the last 2 years.
Guys, if you go back to his comments the last time we talked to him, which was the Tuesday before the draft when he accepted the Brian Piccolo Award, he led by saying, yes, I want to be here in Chicago, that he liked, being here, that he liked, playing for the organization. But then as he answered all the other questions he was asked about Khalil Mack being dealt and some of the things going on, he immediately went to the kind of, well, that's the business, and sometimes you got to live with it. And you could tell, that he, I mean, he didn't come out and say it, but yes, he wants to be a Bear. Yes, he likes Chicago. But I read into everything else he said, but he doesn't really want to be part of a rebuild, And at that point, the Bears were trying a little harder to dispute that it was a rebuild and talking about how competitive they were going to be. They realized they couldn't sell that any longer. Well, with the players, I don't think they could sell that for 5 minutes. I mean, these guys look around the locker room, they see what's happening. And so, again, I hope I'm wrong. And obviously, normally in our business, you don't want to be wrong. In this case, I do, just because I love watching the guy play so much. And because I do think he has an impact on everything that happens with this team this year, because one of the keys to Justin Fields, beyond putting enough around him to let him become a franchise quarterback, beyond the question of whether or not he can be a franchise quarterback, is that one of the ways you protect him is you keep the score down and you don't force him to try and go out and have 30, 40-point games to win. And if they can be very competitive on defense and keep them in games and try and win it with a Luke Getsy ground-based run, safe passing attack, it gives everybody a chance to develop. And there's no question that whether you're rebuilding or going for the Super Bowl, winning is contagious, and the more games you win, the better you feel about yourselves. So I think the presence of Robert Quinn has a big impact on a lot of what's going to happen here. And it's not a one-man team. It's not a sport where you have that, but it is crucial, and it doesn't look good right now, I guess, is the best way I can put it.
If the defense really performs well, if Robert Quinn is here, we talked about the Vegas line of 6.5 wins. I think that's a fair line if the defense is, like I said earlier, league average or slightly above, and Robert Quinn is here is playing. I have a hard time seeing this thing getting to 6.5, or this team getting to 6.5 wins or 7 wins. If Robert Quinn isn't on this roster and performing at a high level. We also, he is a guy that has, had ups and downs. He seems to be someone who, when he's having his best years, when he's performing on the field to the top of his ability, it's usually when he's in the best mental headspace for himself too. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that really wants to feel comfortable. And if he doesn't, that's concerning.
That is such a great point, Kyle, because I talked at length about that subject in particular with both Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace last year coming into the season. And they were all, basically singing from the same hymn book. They said he just, in 2020, he gets here, he's without his family, didn't find a home apparently until well into the summer. COVID hits. He had some minor back issues. He never got comfortable, never settled in, was never in a good headspace. He then came back, devoted the entire offseason, got his family here, had a nice home close to the facility, got in a much better place, and he was in an excellent headspace last year, in large part because of his partnership, nor the relationship with Khalil Mack. And you saw what happened, and so now what happens? Now everything is in upheaval. It's disrupted. Khalil Mack is gone, as well as a few other guys. And all the other veterans are gone. I mean, I think nobody even talks about the loss of Tayshaun Gibson. Tayshaun Gibson for 2 years was one of the most dependable veterans on that defense. And he was basically carrying Eddie Jackson, to be honest with you, and I think that, not that I necessarily even would have brought him back myself based on what they're doing, but the loss to the quality of the defense is significant, at least until you know what you've got in Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon. So we'll see, and hopefully, there's another possibility. Robert's a funky kind of guy. I mean, you just sometimes, you expect one thing, you get the complete opposite. He could walk in Tuesday and say, "Hey, I just didn't feel like practicing." I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen, but you certainly hope it does, because it would be a big boost to this young football team if he's there Tuesday, or at least, before the week is out.
Yeah, I mean, that I don't expect that to happen either, but he is certainly the type of personality that could happen. He could show up with a smile on his face and everything could seem like we're just fine. He is that type of guy. I want to go quickly back to Tayshaun Gibson. He was solid for 2 years. I think that most people have kind of, as you said there, moved along, though, because maybe hype isn't the right word, but I think most people feel that Jaquan Brisker is going to be able to be a solid player and also a contributor pretty early on in this process. Sean, do you expect that to see that early?
Yeah, and I think the big difference too is Brisker's potential, around the football, and whether that's punching the ball out or getting his hands on a pass. And Tashawn Gibson was dependable back there, but he wasn't a guy who was creating a lot of turnovers. And when he's not doing that, and when Eddie Jackson certainly wasn't doing that the last 2 years, that's part of the reason why the Bears, as a defense, weren't creating a lot of turnovers these past couple of years. And I think Jaquan Brisker and Matt Eberflus's system, while we haven't really seen him take any meaningful snaps at this point, I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think he could be a guy who elevates that position.
Guys, it's funny. This is such a new, well, I don't want to rephrase that. We're just, everything we're treading is new ground here, and I actually, and when I look at this and I go back and I keep going back and looking at tape and trying to figure things out, this could, by the end of the year, be one of the best young secondaries in football. I mean, Jalen Johnson, Cooper Kupp called Jalen Johnson one of the two toughest cornerbacks he faced last year. I mean, what better references do you need than that? Okay. And he's going to continue to get better. And I love his attitude and everything about him. Everything I've seen is that Gordon and Johnson have a lot in common. The body types are the same. The style, I think Gordon's actually a little better athlete. He may not be quite as physical, but he's a big play guy. When you look at Brisker's track record at Penn State, it looks a lot like the Eddie Jackson we saw in 2018. And then I don't want to be too hard on Jackson. I think it's frustrating for a lot of people because his decline in play was coincidental with his big contract. And I'm going to assume that's just a fluke and that there's other things going on. But I do know that when he was the best safety in football in 2018, he was a center fielder. He was roaming free. He was there to be a playmaker, to create takeaways, and that was his main responsibility. They tried to get him to do more the last couple of years. I think they're going to make him a center fielder again this year because in Brisker, they think they have a true in-the-box safety. If Eddie Jackson gets back to Pro Bowl type form, and if these three kids are the talents that we think they are, and I even like some of the depth. I'll tell you what, guys, Tavon Young is one of the better nickels in the NFL. People forget that in 2019, the Ravens made him the highest paid nickel in football. They gave him a $25 million deal. The problem is that the poor kid has lost 3 seasons in 6 years with 2 ACLs and a neck injury. And last year, he did stay healthy, but then Marcus Peters went down. They tried to play him outside on the boundary, and he's just not that guy. He's a slot corner. But if he's healthy, and if these young kids can all play, this can be a really good secondary. And now we come full circle. But what makes secondaries even better? It's a pass rush in front of them. And so, if you've got Travis Gibson and Al-Qadim Muhammad, who had 6 sacks last year, Gibson had 7, and maybe even Dominique Robinson in spots taken off because Robert Quinn is anchoring that front. And then you got one of the 5 best linebackers in football in Roquan Smith. It's easy to get excited about the defense, but how many ifs did I just have to put in that description? And that's what training camp is all about.
That's probably a good place to end it too.
I see what you did there, Hub. That was good full circle right there.
That's a nice positive spot to end it. I think when you look at this going into training camp next week, it's funny. I spend a lot of time here as you guys talk, kind of just trying to monitor the chat, and it does seem there's not a lot of people in the middle of the road. People are either think you're a hater because you're being too pessimistic, or people think that the world's about to burn down, that this team's going to be awful. And I would say just go into this season with no expectations. That's how the front office is viewing it. They want to start from the ground up and just see what they have. And I think that's really the best way to view this season. Take the wins and enjoy them when they come. But you want to see those young players in the secondary. Of course, you want to see Justin Fields perform. You want to see someone out of Velus Jones Jr. You want to see the future of this franchise really start to form over the next 4 to 5 months here.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle, it is a great place to leave it. And I think that, most of our listeners and viewers and folks who join us know this. I think that's why they're here. But our job is not to be cheerleaders, and it's not to be haters, and it's not to be homers. I mean, our job is to dig as deep as we can, get as much information as we can, and report it to you all as objectively and fairly and balanced as we can. And that's what we're going to do, and if they're bad, we're going to tell you they're bad. If there's not enough talent on the roster, which there isn't, we're going to tell you that. We're going to tell you that was intentional because it's a way to build a winning football team, and so that's a good thing, and et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm getting at here is that the one absolute given in a situation like this, where you're tearing it down and rebuilding it, is that there's just so much we don't know. And that's going to have to be the fun of it this year, because as you all know, the word fan comes from fanatic. We get the passion. We get you want to win right now, but you're just going to have to accept that that's not it's always the goal to win football games, but it's basically not the plan for this year. And so we're going to continue to give you the plan as best we can. We're going to continue to evaluate them based on the plan, and we're going to evaluate how these guys are playing, good, bad, or indifferent, because that's what they're getting paid millions of dollars to do. And we hope you're going to continue to be with us every week to do it. So I want to remind everybody one more time that you can join these conversations and participate and give us your questions by going to YouTube or going to any of our Twitter accounts, at Sean_Hammond, at Kyle Nabors, at Hub_Arkush. We're back on schedule now. We're going to shoot for 9:30 Friday mornings. I think, Sean, actually, now that I say that, did they say practices are going to start at 10 in training camp? I think they did.
Most of them are 10 o'clock.
Yeah. We're going to have to revisit the timing. We may be going to Friday afternoon or something, Kyle. That's obviously up to you. But we're going to be back every week now, guys, and we hope you're going to join us. We hope that you're going to go to shawlocal.com, because we're going to be reporting daily from training camp. Sean and I, some days we'll even have multiple pieces. We're going to have more information for you than you could possibly, consume in a short period of time. And again, if you're not interested in participating in the podcast, we certainly understand that, but we'd love to have you listen. And so make sure that you go to the App Store on your phone or iTunes and download a regular subscription. You can do that at shawlocal.com. And in the meantime, let's all go out and have a few cold ones tonight and celebrate, because football is back. And next week we go to training camp, and we're going to have it all for you right here at shawlocal.com and our shawlocal.com podcast. So have a great weekend, everybody, and we will talk to you again sometime at the end of next week. Stay at those Twitter accounts, and we'll promote it for you as best we can as soon as we figure out a schedule that works.